There is a kind of creating that leaves you exhausted, and there is a kind of creating that leaves you more alive. One feels frantic, heavy, performative. The other feels spacious, connected, prayerful. For a very long time, I thought creativity was mostly about output. I thought it was mostly about making things, producing work, becoming better, being recognized. But slowly and honestly, through burnout, disappointment, healing, prayer, delay, and play, I began to realize something deeper. Creativity can become communion, not merely something we do for God, but something we do with God. And for me, this thinking changed everything. Because once creativity becomes relationship instead of performance, the pressure begins to loosen. In today's episode, I would like to extend an invitation to return creativity to its original place, to a place not of striving, but to creativity as presence. Welcome to the Courage to Create podcast, a creative sanctuary for Christian artists and the wounded imagination. I'm Theodora Songhai, and I'm glad you're here. I think many Christian artists unintentionally fall into a subtle trap. We create for God, which sounds noble, but often underneath that language is pressure. Underneath it sits obligation, proving, performance, trying to justify our creativity spiritually, trying to make it, quote unquote, useful enough to deserve its existence. And eventually, creativity becomes a burden instead of a delight. But creating with God is different. Creating with God implies relationship. It implies collaboration, attentiveness, presence, listening. It also implies trust. Creating with God implies participation rather than performance. And honestly, I think this is one of the greatest invitations of the creative life. Not simply, what can I make? But how might God want to meet me here? This is why the practice of the presence of God by Brother Lawrence has meant so much to me, particularly in recent years. If you haven't read it, Brother Lawrence was a Carmelite monk in France in the 1600s, and he worked mainly in the kitchens of the monastery. Not monasteries full of silence and candles and stained glass, kitchens. So cooking, cleaning, very ordinary and what I can imagine as hard labor. And yet, amid this, he discovered something profound, that God could be encountered in the midst of ordinary activity. So that encounter happening not only during times of formal prayer, but during washing dishes, preparing meals, small acts done with loving attention. And this completely reframed spirituality for him. He writes, "We ought not to be weary of doing little things for the love of God." And I think this could be an especially great reminder for artists, because we often separate prayer, spirituality, devotion from making, crafting, designing, editing, experimenting. But what if attentive creativity itself becomes prayer? What if collage becomes prayer? What if stitching becomes prayer? What if color, photography, the shaping of clay all become prayer? Not metaphorically, I mean actual prayer. I think prayer at its core is attention. And creativity also requires attention. To create, you must notice. And oftentimes you must notice multiple things at the same time. So you must notice light, color, texture, emotion, movement. You must also notice silence, contrast, story. Artists are people trained in attention. And attention is deeply spiritual. Because what we attend to shapes who we become. This is why contemplative traditions value slowness so deeply. Because hurry prevents noticing. And noticing is often where God speaks. This is actually something I explore in my creative prayer starter kit. This whole idea emerged from this growing realization that creativity can become a meeting place with God. And it's not about performance, it's not about productivity, but a meeting place. And many of the practices included in the starter kit are intentionally simple because prayer doesn't need to be complicated to be transformative. So for example, there's things like the breath and line prayer, walking, noticing prayer, color prayer, the 3-minute play prayer. These practices are gentle ways of returning creativity to communion. And frankly, I think many people are spiritually exhausted because they've only experienced prayer as verbal or intellectual. But some people encounter God through making. I am one of said people. Some people encounter God through movement, through color, through imagination, through sensory experience, through beauty. And all of that matters. Now, here is something important. Creating with God does not mean God dictates every brushstroke. Sometimes people become anxious around this idea. They think, what if I make the wrong thing? But relationship is not mechanical control. It is responsive presence. So in my experience, and I'm still growing in this area, but collaborating with God creatively often looks like attentiveness, surrender, dialing into intuition, trusting curiosity, trusting, listening, openness. And it is less, God, give me exact instructions, and more, God, help me remain present to what is unfolding. This is where I think play becomes deeply important too. And this connects beautifully to our previous episode on play. Because play, as we explored then, creates spaciousness for relationship. Play also interrupts control. Play loosens perfectionism. And play allows surprise. And surprise, even though I'm someone who hates surprises, but surprise, I'm finding, is often where delight lives. Now we need to talk about approval. Because creating for approval eventually disconnects us from ourselves, and often from God too. Approval-based creativity constantly asks, will people like this? Is it good enough? Is this impressive enough? Will this perform well? Will I be validated? And honestly, this mindset is spiritually exhausting because your nervous system remains trapped in evaluation. You stop listening inwardly. You stop noticing beauty. You stop experimenting. You even stop risking. And eventually you begin creating from fear instead of love. But art created with God emerges differently. Not necessarily less excellent, but certainly less anxious, more rooted, more honest, and I think more alive. I think one of the reasons creative prayer matters so much is because many experiences cannot be spoken directly. Some things, like grief, longing, wonder, trauma, beauty, joy, exist beyond language. And especially I think grief and trauma, sometimes some things are too hard to say. Art, on the other hand, allows us to communicate what words cannot hold. And throughout scripture, God consistently communicates through imagery, metaphor, poetry, architecture. He communicates through music, symbolism, dreams, story. And all of this shows us that God is not afraid of imagination, and he uses it constantly. I think one of the most healing things artists can learn is how to remain present while creating. Not rushing toward outcome, not obsessing over productivity, but inhabiting process. This is something Brother Lawrence understood deeply. God is present now, not merely once the masterpiece is finished. Perhaps this changes even the smallest creative acts. Perhaps preparing your workspace, mixing colors, sharpening pencils, arranging paper scraps, stitching fabric, editing audio can all become sacred attentiveness. Not because the activity itself is magical or somehow sacramental or whatever, but because God is already present there in those acts. I think many adults struggle with creative prayer because it can feel unproductive, especially in achievement-orientated cultures. But not everything sacred is efficient. I mean, let's take, for example, love, friendship, even prayer, play, beauty. All of these things are wildly inefficient. And yet these are the very things that make us human. And I think this is why contemplative creativity can feel countercultural, because it refuses agency and it chooses presence instead. And the cultivation of presence is a very slow thing. So this week, I want to invite you into a small creative prayer practice. Choose one. Perhaps breath and line prayer. Perhaps a simple collage or a noticing walk. Color prayer. A 3-minute play prayer. And while you do any of them, please release outcome. You are not trying to impress God. He's already deeply impressed and delighted by you. You are not trying to perform spirituality because you have the capacity to connect deeply with spiritual things more than you realize. You are simply making space for encounter. And so I invite you to ask yourself, God, how might we create together today? Perhaps creativity was never meant to become another arena of striving. Perhaps it was always meant to become communion. A place where your nervous system softens, your imagination opens, your attention deepens. A place where your soul remembers that God is near, not after the work is complete, but within the making of the work itself. For the artist exhausted by performance, for the creative trapped in approval seeking, for the one longing to rediscover delight and presence, may your creativity become prayer again. May your hands slow down enough to notice God beside you. May your art become less about proving and more about participating. May beauty become conversation. May process become communion. And may you discover that God has been waiting for you not only in the finished work, but in the making itself. So this week, choose one small creative prayer practice. Not to create something impressive, but simply to become present. The Creative Prayer Starter Kit, which includes all of the different types of prayer that I described earlier, is available as a free resource on my website. So please go to theodorasonghai.com/sanctuary free resources. We'll also leave the link in the show notes. And if this episode encouraged you, share it with another artist who may need freedom from performance-based creativity. You do not have to create alone. If today's episode encouraged you, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps this sanctuary reach other artists who need it. And if you'd like guided creative exercises, devotionals, and spiritual tools for your artistic journey, visit the Creative Courage Sanctuary website and join the email community. Until next time, create bravely, rest deeply, and remember, your creativity is holy.